full-time job. My full-time job, my vocation is I'm an ear doctor, essentially. I don't do surgery on anyone, so luckily my skill set, even though it involves my hands, is not that precarious when I'm doing my day-to-day vocations. So the reason why I think some of you might know us or what you might be interested in is what's Iconic Comics. I've heard of DC, I've heard of Marvel, I've heard of Image, but what we do is Iconic Comics was formed in Texas roughly about 2.5, 3 years ago, and it formed to address a need. Right now, if you look at the comics industry landscape, there's a lot of change happening. A lot of it is good, and a lot of it is bad. So I'm guessing with a show of hands, most of you have seen Marvel movies, correct? Or DC movies, I'm sure. How many of you actually read the comics? Good number of you. It's about 60, 65%. But if you look at sales numbers on average since the Marvel and DC movies have come out, they've actually been going down. So it's a really weird trend because you would think historically in the past, like for example, when the 1989 Batman movie came out with Michael Keaton, followed by Batman Returns, and even with Spider-Man and let's say X-Men, you typically see a rise in the numbers of people going to see the movies, and you would see a rise in comic book sales. But right now, and I think part of it has to do with the corporate landscape, you don't see it as much. You'll see a rise in people going to see the Avengers, like Endgame, they'll go and see the Batman. But then when you go to comic book stores, the sales are not doing as well. What do you think is outselling American comics? Digital comics is doing very well, even though the numbers are hard to come by because they're not divulged that easily. But what was the other one I heard someone say? Manga is outselling American comics by a landslide. Last year, one volume of Demon Slayer outsold every American comic on the market. Why is that? Like, if I just a show of opinions, who knows why manga is outselling American comics? Part of it is it's new, but part of it isn't, because manga has been around for quite a number of years. It's a lot easier to come by, that's true. You can go to any Barnes & Noble and buy it for $10 to $12, even cheaper sometimes. Does anyone have any other ideas why?
Marvel and DC are putting their political side into there?
That's a big one. So a lot of it is people read the books, and if you've read them when you were younger, you pick it up now and you're like, what is going on here? This isn't the Batman and Superman that I'm used to. If you look at a lot of what the Japanese do, I've done this talk before, where the Japanese historically are very good at reverse engineering. They were one of the last countries to enter the Industrial Revolution, but within a decade, they had taken the railroad and they had revitalized it into a much more efficient system. They've done that historically. And so whenever I meet young people and I say, hey, do you read X-Men and Avengers? And they say, no. I ask them, what are you reading? And they say, My Hero Academia. So I read My Hero Academia and I say, all they're doing is they took the model that we use, superheroes, and they said, we can make it better. And that's what they did. They took X-Men, they took the Avengers, and then they redid it. The other thing is that culturally, because they're more culturally homogenous, what they tend to do is they tend to not care what other people think. So when people get mad at them when they say that guy's muscles are too big, or her figure is way too skinny, they're just like, all right, we don't care. We're selling a lot of books. Meanwhile, you guys are over here having fights over it. So there's a lot of changes that I feel like need to be made, and I do think there is some course correction. Numbers came out recently that showed that 2/3 of American comic shops actually saw a 20% increase in sales in Marvel and DC. But you look at manga and it's 67 to 80%, upshot. I mean, it is such a wide margin. Me personally, where we're coming from is with a lot of people being very disenfranchised with Marvel and DC, there's a resurgence in independent books. So people are saying, you know what? I really don't like the direction things are going. I feel like we can actually put out a better product and we can hopefully compete in that market. So a lot of people are going independent. That's kind of how we came into it. I worked in merchandising for 10 years. So I was merchandising artist for Marvel, DC, Lucasfilm, Hasbro, Valve, Steam, you name it. If I've seen literally 5 people walking with my shirt on, and I'm just like, I did that shirt 6 years ago, and they're still selling it. It's the one with, it's Darth Vader, and he has a following of stormtroopers like Abbey Road, crossing the street. If you see that at Kohl's or Walmart or Hot Topic, I did that shirt design 6 years ago, but they still sell it to this day. So I worked in that side of merchandising, which is interesting because it's very different than comics. The idea was you have to sell. Basically for a decade in working in merchandising, if I didn't do my job correctly and I wasn't moving t-shirts, bags, prints, posters, or whatever, I would be canned. So I feel like that plus my background in something that's not creative, audiology, I think gave us a unique perspective in terms of what can we do different in the industry. So about 3 or 4 years ago, crowdfunding was a huge thing because people suddenly said, you know what? People like Brian Pulido have been using Kickstarter forever. Let's go into that space and let's try and compete against Marvel and DC. But the problem with it is that the former professionals who went into those spaces, they're coming from that culture where it has nothing really to do with what side they're on. It's the fact that they didn't know what they were doing. So the biggest thing was their books are late, the production quality is shoddy. A lot of them were falling the same pit trap that Image Comics made back in the 90s. Image Comics was started by a group of Marvel artists who said, you know what, we're kind of tired of what we're being paid and the way we're being treated. We're going to go form Image Comics and we're going to do it the right way. The first year of sales were incredible because it was legends like Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee. The problem was that because they had an artist versus writer mentality, they did not hire writers. So within the first year of sales, their sales numbers tanked, and then that's when they started hiring writers. So we noticed that a lot of these mistakes were repeating in crowdfunding because a lot of the artists were not hiring writers. Us personally, like myself, I have a creative team, so I'm the muscle. I can draw, but I'm not creative. So if someone tells me like, hey, here's a crayon, draw something for me, I'm just sitting there like, I don't know what to draw for you. I literally have to be told what to do. But the good thing is my best friend, he's the brain. He's a really good writer, he's a really good idea guy, but he can't draw to save his life. So we work very well together. That's how we worked in merchandising. I remember my first week on the job, they said, okay, here's your job. You have to come up with one design a day for 5 days. So I don't care how long that takes you. At the end of the day, when you clock out, we need a new design in a Dropbox folder. And they're like, can you do that? And I'm thinking to myself, yes, I can do that. And I call my friend Mark. I'm like, you've got to help me. I have no idea like what sells. Think of something funny, something creative. And then that's essentially how we've been working all this time. So within a year and a half, all these books that people were putting out, 42-page books, were late. They were all late. Think about it this way. A mangaka can put out a chapter a week on Shonen Jump. A week. And you look at it, Shonen Jump is a $2 app on your phone. And you can read every volume of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z for $2 a month. And they limit you. They're like, now just remember, you can only read like 80 chapters a month. And I'm like, who can read 80 chapters a month? That's the best deal ever. But they're eating our lunch because their work ethic is so good. Now, the thing about it is that, realistically speaking, an American artist has limitations. But I do think it's weak sauce when you say, I can't finish a 42-page book in a year. There's no excuse. I'm sorry. We do this as a part-time job. It's just a hobby for us, and we create 200 pages a year. And that's just me by myself. So this book right here, we did this over the course of a year, 180-something pages. This book right here, I did in 2 months, 64 pages. So if it's me, and I'm doing everything, letters, inking, pencils, colors, I do the whole thing. And some of these pros who are in the space, they just do the pencils, and they let someone else do the inks, someone else do the colors. But I'm thinking to myself, you've worked in DC and Marvel for how many years? And you were used to doing 12 issues a year, and you can't even put out 42 pages? So anyway, the crowdfunding model was starting to go down because people didn't trust it anymore. But a friend of mine, he was an entrepreneur out of Texas, and he said, what is the one thing, because he has his hand in a lot of jars, trying things out, he's always been successful at it. He said, what's the one thing keeping people back in crowdfunding? And I said, it's printing and fulfillment. They just don't know how to do it. And these are people who should know because they worked in Marvel and DC and Image for so long. This guy used to work at UPS, and he said, you mean like packaging books? And I said, yeah. He said, we can do that. Like, I did that as a summer job. It's not hard. So that's how it got started. Iconic Comics is an imprint company, and they go out and they look at crowdfunders, and they say, who are the ones who are reliable, the ones who have a good product out, where you can tell they have a good head on their shoulders because the art is good, the writing is good, they have editors who look at their work, and they're able to actually put the work out on time. And so they started doing this, and about 2 years ago, our flagship title was Common America. You can look this up on the internet, go on Kickstarter, go on Indiegogo. I'm very blessed because a lot of times in the creative space, you have no idea what's going to take off. I don't know if any of you know the backstory of Demon Slayer, which is probably like the top-selling manga at this moment. Not necessarily in terms of overall ranking. I think One Piece has actually outlasted it. But Demon Slayer, it was not that successful in Japan. And in fact, I think the final volume came out And what happened was something uncanny. When it made it to the States and when the anime came out, it was incredible. And they basically had to call the guy up and they were like, I think you need to restart the series because we don't know what to do anymore. Like, you are selling hotcakes overseas just because of the content you're putting out. And it's always a surprise. You might think that you have the best idea in the world, but when you actually put it to paper, it's going to be ultimately up to the readers to decide if you're a success or not. We put this out as a gag, honestly. Someone had kind of dared us to do a title where it was driven by a female character because we had heard, like, oh my gosh, Marvel and DC, like, they can't write women characters well. And my friend and I, we're just used to doing comedies, so we said, let's just do a satire. So we created this book called Common America. It's a tokusatsu type book. Borrows a lot of elements from Japanese media, and it took off. On Kickstarter, our first campaign, we raised $20K, and we were like, oh wow, $20K, like that's incredible. Here we are, we just finished Volume 5, which just ended on Monday, and we raised $140,000. And so that was a 2-year growth of over, I can't even do math, and I'm Asian, but it was a crazy number. So we're very happy and we're very blessed to be able to do it. And the other people who have been with us with our imprint, whether that be Doug Ernst, who's with us at this convention, he's one of the guests on Soul Finder, or Eric Canetti, who's a former image artist with Arcadina, which is his title. We've been doing very well. So the good thing is that we hope that with a solid head on people's shoulders and a good business acumen, I really do think we can be competitive with the Japanese by essentially doing what they do, seeing how their business models work and reverse engineering it. What we do that's a little bit different is we blend 3 business models from 3 different countries. The Japanese are very hardworking. They put out, like I said, a chapter every week, and that's how they're able to stay competitive. What they don't tell you is this, for some of you who might not know. When you pick up a manga, it'll typically tell you who the artist is, and it'll tell you who the writer is. They don't mention the assistants. So manga is so big in Japan that they have an army of assistants to help them with backgrounds, shading, halftones, lettering, and that type of thing. So it's a workhorse mentality. And you can actually look at articles online of the number of mangaka who have literally died at their tables because they overwork themselves. So they're there and they're grinding, trying to get works out. And it is definitely like a passion project. It's a devotion that they do. I honestly want to live to a very ripe old age. And even though I love what I do, I don't want to be in that position. But on the other hand, it's just me by myself, and obviously my writer has the script, but I have to do everything from the ground up. I do pencils, inks, lettering, colors, which in and of itself is very arduous. So putting out a book every month is also not feasible for me. So the good thing is this: we have basically a manga aesthetic. So I study a lot of Asian art. All of the books that we do is I don't think we hire a single American for covers or interiors or pinups or anything like that. Everything is either done by Koreans, South Americans, Brazilians are very good, or Chinese artists. This one, like for example, this is a reprint. This is our 4th reprint, and this is actually by a Korean artist. And the back is by the same guy, but this is by a Hong Kong artist, front and back. And I mean, I think the biggest compliment I get is people say, take your book and put it up against something that's on the shelf from Marvel and DC today. And you're asking yourself, why aren't they hiring these people? Like, it's so crazy. They don't even have a mind for like the aesthetic that people are looking for. So our storytelling is Western. Our style is manga influence, but our distribution is European. I spent about 2 years living off and on in Austria and France. You guys are gonna find this hard to believe, but France is the 2nd largest consumer of comics and manga in the world. It was the craziest thing. It was pre 9/11. I was living in Orléans, France, in the summer of 2000, and I lived less than a quarter of a mile from a tabac, which is where your newsstands are. And I just thought, I like comics. I'm gonna go over and see if I can pick up a copy of like Asterix, which is kind of their big title over there, plus Lucky Luke, which is really popular in Europe. I go over to tabac, and I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone because I was like, why is there a lot of manga on the shelf? Like, this is France. You don't expect manga to be there. And that's when I learned, like, no, believe it or not, manga is huge in France. They have, like, the biggest anime conventions you've ever seen. But the distribution model that the Europeans use is they have such a respect for the medium of storytelling in comics that hardcover is the standard over there. And their artists only put out a book either quarterly, 2 times a month, or 2 times a year, or 3 times a year. That gives the artists enough time to create the work that they want where they don't feel like they're being rushed. And the reader might feel frustrated, kind of in a George R. R. Martin kind of way, because it's like, when is this book coming out? But because they have a fixed schedule, you kind of know roughly when their books are coming out, but you don't feel bad waiting because the quality is so good. Everything is done in hardcover. So after we kind of talked about it, we said we should do it where the Iconic Comics model is the gold standard is hardcover. Our books are $10 for the crowdfunding campaign, $5 for shipping, $15 total, and you get it in hardcover. That's the default. We ask people, go online, you can pick any major artist you can think of. You're like, oh my gosh, this guy used to work at DC. Oh yeah, how much is he charging for his 40-page book? $25. It's like, we're charging $10 for a 64-page hardcover book, and it's standard throughout. So we've been able to grow within the last 2 years by just doing what other people don't do. And people are like, what's the formula for success? And we're like, the formula for success is not paying attention to what these people are doing. They tank your industry. Like, that's the reason why manga is eating your lunch, and God bless them. I think that's good, because when you're competitive, that makes you have to kind of think and rethink and kind of revolutionize how you decide to do business here in the West. So the good thing is this, like I said, we have quite a number of artists who currently publish under Iconic. We have 2 titles. We have Common America and we have Black Ops. Like I mentioned before, Eric Canetti joined us recently. He's actually the first pro who's joined with the imprint. We hire mostly hobbyists, so people whose day jobs are not making comics. And he, like I said, is a former image artist. He has Argentina out. We have Alejandro Mirabal. Some of you might know him. If you remember, a few years ago, Neil Blomkamp it was revealed that he was working on his version of like Alien 3 that was going to come out, and there was this amazing concept art. Well, this guy was a concept artist. He just got hired by Eat Software out in Dallas. So he has actually gone to some greener pastures, but he's still actually working on the sequel to his book, which we hope will be out probably within the next year. And like I mentioned before, Doug Ernst with Soul Finder, again, he was a journalist, not his full-time job making comics, and he was able to put out 2 volumes of Soul Finder within the last year and a half, and the 3rd volume should be coming out sometime this summer. So we're rolling right along, and there's some tricks up our sleeves in terms of what we're trying to do as far as like competing with and against manga. I love manga. It's sad to say, but I used to be a pretty avid comic book reader, and I gave up on comics about 3 years ago. I don't buy a single American comic. Everything I read now is manga. And for people in the room who might be like, I can't get into manga, like I'm such a devoted comic book fan. I was actually the same way. I was not part of that group in the 90s. When Cowboy Bebop, Samurai Champloo, Fooly Cooly, Gundam Wing, when all those were coming out, I tried them all and I said, you know what? This is just not my thing. There's something about the way that they tell stories that I think is kind of different. So my former agent, it was about 5 years ago, he said, you really need to watch anime and read manga. And I said, no, I can't do it. And he said, I'm going to let you read this one manga, and if you don't like it, I am not going to ask you again. And that book, for those of you who might not know, the book was called One Punch Man. Now, the book is exactly what it's about. It is about a man who can destroy and kill everything with one punch. And I read this, and in the back of my head, I had this thought, and the thought was the argument for writing Superman. A lot of writers do not want to write Superman. Why do you think that is? There's no potential, there's no conflict. Like, he's the most powerful man in the DC universe. Like, unless you have kryptonite, there's nothing to do against him. And so people just gave up on it. Like, let's reboot Superman and let's let him marry Lois Lane. Oh, now they're divorced in this other universe. Now they have a kid. Now he doesn't have a kid. And it's like, oh my gosh, like now you're just spinning your wheels trying to actually come up with something. One Punch Man, it's Saitama running around destroying things with one punch. I finished 15 volumes and I thought, they literally reverse engineered Superman, and they took up the challenge. They said, you guys don't like your character that can like do all this stuff? We will show you how it's done. And here we are. I don't know how many volumes One Punch Man is on right now, but they're still trucking along. And I thought they have taken our storytelling and they had made it better by improving on it. I know there's a lot of My Hero Academia fans probably in this crowd. I read it just to keep up with it, and I try to learn from it. It's actually not my cup of tea. But essentially what they're doing is they're taking the best storytelling in Avengers and X-Men and just readapting it for their purpose. They looked at us, they said they have the superhero genre, but we're gonna come in and we're gonna compete with them and we're gonna beat them at their own game. So I'm not cocky enough to say, well, we're gonna go to your market and compete with our books. That's not at all like what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that I do think that there is hope for the Western comic book industry by learning from what other people are doing in their markets and putting your money, voting with your wallet is essentially what it is. And so I know a lot of people are sad that people don't read comics nowadays, but they drift to manga. And it's no, you should be looking at it as a positive thing, because I think there's a lot to learn in terms of looking what they're doing and trying to adapt what we do in our storytelling to hopefully match them at their own game, so to speak. So that's essentially what we do at Iconic Comics. And like I said, you can go to iconiccomics.com, check out our library of work, go to Kickstarter, go to Indiegogo. We typically are on both platforms to sell our works. Obviously, everything is cheaper when you get it through crowdfunding. $10 hardcovers. Once they go to the online store, the price goes up by a few dollars more, so that incentivizes people to help us on the front end buy the hardcovers. That also justifies the price, because right now, what we tell our printer is we say, hey, we can move about 10 to 20,000 books a year. So based on that long-term goal, it lets us be competitive in the market by being able to give our customers a low price on hardcover. And people tend to like that. We have some people who are kind of adverse to it because they like the traditional comic with the saddle stitch on the spine, but we think we're winning people over because, like I said, you look at manga, if you go to a Barnes & Noble, every weekend we do research by going to our local bookstores. You have the manga section, and it is pristine. All the spines match. You can actually tell volume 1 to volume 10 or volume 50 of One Piece, volume 1 to volume whatever of Fruits Basket, whatever it might be. Hop over to the graphic novel section and it's pandemonium. You can't tell what's going on. My nephew was like, I watched Batman, it was cool. I was like, all right, cool. Help me, Uncle Tim, where do I start? I was like, I don't know, go over to that section right there. And he's like, the Batman literally has like 10 volume 1s. Which one's the one I start with? And I'm like, which universe do you want to be in? He just gave up. He was like, just take me over here and let me read Jujutsu Kaisen or whatever. And I'm like, again, it's just the visual presentation of what is happening on one side versus what's happening on the other. So for those of you who do know us from our work, thank you for coming by, because I think it's a real treat being able to be a creator. If you had told me this 4 years ago, I would have thought you were silly, because I didn't think it was something that I would be doing as my other part-time job. But it's happened and we've made it work. So our message to a lot of people out there who are wanting to get into independent comics is do it, but you have to have that business mindset in mind. I always tell people the one thing you want to do before you make any comic is you want to have all your ducks in a row, and you have to deal with the boring stuff first. The cost of printing, the cost of distribution, how many pages are you going to have, what's the page size. These are all things that you have to think about before you go in there. But if you have your business side correct, then hopefully you can be like an Iconic Comics, and we're all doing very well as far as our sales numbers are concerned. Like I said, my friend, the co-writer, I'm registered as an LLC, but he's not. He is actually just an individual filing his taxes as an individual. And he just paid out the wazoo in taxes because he just thought, my gosh, like I got this huge payout last year from writing, but I basically had to pay the IRS like 1/3 of what I made. So he's at that point right now where he's having to start seriously about incorporating himself so that he can save on his taxes come the next tax season. So we're all doing very well. We're excited, and we're glad to meet people who come into the imprint wanting a distribution deal or whatnot. Last time I talked to the head of Iconic Comics, they get about 15 submissions a month, and there's some months where they just turn down all of them just because they just know that they're not ready yet. And a lot of these people are actually pros. They're people who are like, hey, just to let you know, I worked at Marvel. Here's my book. And the guy's like, yeah, according to this, you only have 10 pages done, and your crowdfunding campaign is like a year late. Like, nah, we just can't do that. We deal with people who are very serious about trying to not only publish, but also be competitive in an already competitive market. So we're really happy. Like I said, myself, Mark Pellegrini, Douglas Ernst, we're guests for the show, but we're over in the corner, really just catty corner to the Ninja Turtles out there. And we have a couple of books that we have available. We have Common America, that's our flagship title. And then we have Black Ops, the omnibus. So this actually collects all 200 pages of our work. And again, this is kind of a labor of love. We've been working on this for about 2 years. And in our 5th volume, like I said, just finished on Kickstarter on Monday, but we will be launching it on Indiegogo too as kind of a last call before we go to the website. But I'd like to open it up right now. We have a few minutes to questions that people might have. Yes, go ahead.
Well, the thing is, I have so many questions. I'm trying to think of how to narrow it down to one.
But I guess generally, so I don't work in comics. I am independent game development. I'm kind of wondering about, because you do a lot of stuff with like cross promotion,
Yes.
different artists and stuff like that. And then you talked a lot about on Kickstarter the importance of like delivering on things like that. I'm kind of wondering just generally if you have any advice, especially when it comes to kind of I don't know, marketing or fulfillment that can maybe not. That's not specifically to comics.
Yeah.
Or stuff that could apply generally, just like important. I mean, in addition to what we talked about, important kind of roles just to keep in mind when it comes to building an audience and kind of.
Sure. Part of it is you can't just stick with one or two platforms. So right now, a lot of creators, they just say, all I need is a crowdfunder and YouTube. The problem with YouTube is, if any of you have channels, it is hard to grow subscribers. It's really hard because unless you're entertaining or you're charismatic, that's not going to happen. What we ended up doing was we would partner with people who are kind of tangentially in our space, where it was still mutually beneficial for both of us. So for example, I don't know how many of you read webcomics, but do you know Merriweather Comics? So they have like 6 million followers on different platforms. They have a Patreon that's really robust, but they're a webcomics creator and his crew that work on several titles at one time. Now, if you talk to a lot of the like Marvel and DC pros, they're like, webcomics is stupid because it's free. Like, you never put out a free thing because you have to get paid for it. And I'm like, well, I think your thinking is wrong because it's a long-term thing. You put out the webcomic, it's successful. And then if you collect it and you say, hey, I know you like our webcomics for free, here's the collected edition. You can purchase it for like $10, $20. People are like, yes, because I want to own a physical medium, especially nowadays. I think maybe a year or two ago, you have people who are like, nah, I'm purely digital. I'm just going to read digital. Well, you see what they can do. If you look at the